what's behind the immigration question from a different standpoint. This is not going to be about immigrants or the history of immigration into the US. People are mainly debating this now from the standpoint of border control and waves of really desperate people are pouring across the southern border of the United States. And there's not a great deal of consideration of why they're coming here or what might have caused that. But to answer those questions, you have to go into our history and the history of the Americas. So from that standpoint, I'm going to present some new considerations, or should be, or at least new to this debate, which I hope become part of a wider discussion. I'm calling this.
I think Fred needs to go on mute.
Okay.
Magdalena, you might have to put people on mute if they can't do it themselves.
I'll have to do that, I think.
Well, you can, or Magdalena can as well.
I don't think so, because I'm the host.
Yeah, but she's the co-host.
Let me.
Magdalena, can you put Fred on mute?
No.
Or make me co-host and I'll do it?
Why don't you stop the recording and start it over again? Let's just make you the co-host. How do you do the co-host?
You gotta go to the participant's name, and their upper right-hand side, usually it says make co-host by the name or by the video box of each person.
Let me see about Magdalena, making her the co-host. It only allows me to say make host.
It doesn't say make co-host. Well, then you could physically put Fred on mute then, since Fred doesn't seem to.
All right, where's Fred?
Able to hear us.
Oh, I've got to go back here. Let's see if I can find Fred. Shoot.
You could also expel people if they're not responsive and they're making noise.
I don't see.
Upper right-hand side, there's like 3 buttons beside each name.
Yeah, but I don't see Fred. I only have
Fred.
5 pictures here of the people.
I think you have to click on the bottom to participants so that you can see the names on the right-hand side.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to have to get out of this silly thing here. Okay, let's try it over again.
I'm surprised it doesn't allow you to make somebody else co-host.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, so where's Fred? Fred.
I'm getting the feeling that this Fred person doesn't actually exist, but might be a disruptor. You might want to just.
Fred. There we go. I got it.
Okay, good. All right.
Well, let's start over. Okay. Sure. Very good. Now we're set. So I'm going to share the screen, which is, here it is. And now I'm going to do the screen show. All right, here we go. Now you could start the recording.
Go ahead, Tony.
Okay. No. Now I don't see the from the beginning button. Yeah.
Like you want full screen slideshow or something?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what I usually do, oh, there's a little icon at the bottom that I often use, next to the that little slide rule that has the positive negative on the bottom right hand side of the PowerPoint, and next to the negative, yeah, see where it says
There
like
it is. Slideshow.
86%?
I got it. I
Yeah,
got
there
it.
you go. Click that.
That's it. Okay. Now we can start. This is called Who Promoted the Advancement of the Peoples of the Western Hemisphere? Who promoted the spark of genius, and what was that history? Now, I'm going to go back to the first display of genius in the hemisphere, which made two places in particular in the Western Hemisphere centers of advanced civilization, in many ways on a par with the developments going on in China, in India, in Egypt, Mesopotamia, some other places. It was different, but it was genius. And the two places, the two most powerful centers were in the Andes Mountains, from Peru down to Chile, and also in what's now Mexico, into Central America, in Yucatan and southern Mexico. I have some pictures here. This is from Peru, and these developments show agricultural engineering. What you see here is a terraced agriculture to catch water and to irrigate, to have intensive irrigation. Here is a channel coming down from these are ancient structures. There's a channel coming down from the mountains. This is a water course. This is a terrace. There's a whole huge canyon that has this kind of terracing now. You'll see this around Peru, but these are the ancient inventions of the Incas and other people who used astronomy to tell them what time, exact time of year to plant something at what altitude. Astronomy was also used for navigation. But you see the catchment apparatus here for intensive farming. Now they didn't have they had metalworking, but they didn't do they did casting of metals, but they didn't have an elaborate metal economy. Instead, they used fibers, and the fibers, particularly reeds, and you saw this in the boat that was made by Thor Heyerdahl for the Kon-Tiki voyage. You have to look that up, where he showed that people from South America could easily have sailed across the Pacific to colonize the islands in the Pacific. They used boats made out of reeds, and which are still used on Lake Titicaca. This is a remaining suspension bridge, which terrified the Spaniards, but it was very, very strong, made out of thousands or millions of strands of woven reeds. They made armor out of woven things. So this is it's an advanced process. They had in Mexico, I'm not going to show it, but the great invention in Mexico was maize or corn. There was no plant quite like that they hybridized to get corn. This is an invention. It might have occurred in a decade of intensive work, but this is you know, quite a couple of millennia ago. And they made many varieties of maize. They had to combine that with beans and squash to have a fully nourishing diet. But they had centers, trade centers, cities and colossal monuments, and a great development of numbers and so forth in both North and South America. The most advanced developments spread into the other peoples of North America from Mexico in many ways. There was also navigation. So I'm not going to take this further right now. When the Spanish and the British, as well as Portuguese, colonized the Americas, they brought with them, or they had with them, the advancements from the Renaissance and from the tool making and the metal making and the literature, as well as the religion, which was a great advance. The Christian religion and the religions of monotheism were a great advance over the mystery religions of the Middle East. They brought all those things, or had all those things, with them, and to the extent they spread into the Americas, this was an advance for the time. The problem is they did not really share these things, and they themselves did not practice a half of this. There was a split in Europe between those who adhered to those really Western ideas and the old the hideous mystery empires of the Middle East. So what these empires did in the Americas was to use cheap and slave labor and to deliberately prevent the peoples of this hemisphere from having these powers. They used them as virtual animals. There was, in the 1760s and 70s, a revolution of technology in England. Benjamin Franklin was there, inspiring the core of people who did this. I've presented this in other ways. It's in my volume 1. England had a tremendous increase in power in the Industrial Revolution. The problem is that the people who then were in power in England came to the decided policy that no other nations would be allowed to have these powers, so that they would rise out of the political control and you know, financial and other control of the empire. And so we had to have a revolution to a large extent because of this relationship. That is, the British now had great power, steam power, advanced metalworking, chemistry, and so forth. The United States, even though they came from England, did not have these industrial powers. We were way behind England, and England had the policy they're not going to spread. So American revolutionaries who were Hamiltonian nationalists fought to industrialize the country. We would not be independent without it. And they were very anxious to see these powers spread to the world. This was the beginning of the United States as the leading anti-imperialist power. By far, there wasn't anything like that anywhere else. At the same time, a transatlantic pro-imperial faction formed against USA national ideals. This was the British Empire, the northeastern US financiers, Boston and New York, and the southern slave owners. Now, the southern slave owners came to be dominant with that backing, and they believed not only in free trade and the British doctrines, the slave owners, but they wanted to spread a slave empire. And they made war using the US government against Mexico, but they had private wars all over the place called filibusters. There was an ecological issue. The slave cotton growing and export destroyed the soil, and they wanted to grab fresh soil to use that up. So you got to spread. Lincoln opposed this war and opposed these imperialists within the United States. They were called the Young America Movement, and there's a mural honoring Lincoln and President Juarez, his ally in what became the American Civil War. Lincoln said that man is unlike the animals because of his discoveries and inventions, and he can use infinite resources to make a better world. And he was anti-imperialist from the very beginning of his career as a young man. Knew what the enemy was, that they were soulless, as well as slave owners, as well as, tyrants. In Philadelphia, and this is a specialty of my volumes, there was a nationalist faction headquarters, opponents of Wall Street, nation builders, Henry Carey, the economist, and people associated with the Pennsylvania Railroad, and a whole science complex and academic complex there. They built the American steel industry. They organized it from scratch in a few years. And they built up a whole array of industries based on Lincoln's and Carey's policies, creating the fastest forward motion of industry that had ever taken place, making the US a world industrial leader. These were, in most respects, progressive leaders, and they included the strongest leaders in favor of Black civil rights in the Reconstruction era. Lincoln brought land-redeeming science to American farmers, created the agriculture department. So these are all things that are contributing to a machine that could help mankind, that was more and more coming out of the USA, these benefits. Transcontinental Railroad, especially the Northern Pacific, the second one, was designed to connect with Asia and the west coast of South America to have peaceful relations and anti-imperial relations to build up all those places. So this system of ideas after the war spread. These are protectionist ideas, these are nationalist ideas, spread from America to Germany, Russia, Japan, and much of the world, including Australia and places within the British control. Sovereign nations, cooperation between sovereign nations, and economics for the general welfare. That policy and the success of the US in this period made the United States the most popular country in the world. I want to point now to a particular individual because he's very important for the question of Latin America. A Philadelphia nationalist named William J. Palmer. He was a Quaker. He opposed war, but nevertheless, he joined the army when the Civil War broke out, and he became a spy and a cavalry general and won the Medal of Honor. There he is as a young cavalry officer. This is the greatest developer of the American West. You can look him up, but he's relegated to a small place in standard history books now, but very well known in the Mountain West. So he built the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, built up all the most important industries in Colorado, especially the steel and coal industries. He founded the town of Colorado Springs. Now, I'm going to pause this right here because a woman named Helen Hunt married Palmer's partner out in Colorado Springs and wrote a fabulous book exposing the USA and its shameful record of abuse of Native Americans. It's called A Century of Dishonor. So it's published in 1880. So it's the whole US history up to that point. All the broken treaties, the murder, the outrage. She's writing this as a person who loves the United States. She's pro-Christian. Her father was a Whig a parson. And she believes in civilization. She believes in technological progress. So from that standpoint, she is perfectly equipped to attack and criticize the United States for not living up to these ideals that mankind needs. The crimes are best exposed if you love the perpetrator. Now, General Palmer went on to build. He did not pay much attention to Indians except the ones that were attacking his surveyors. He saw them as, he didn't know enough to really take their side. He was trying to develop things and saw them as an enemy. Here's a man who fought for the liberation of Black people, and Palmer built the Mexican National Railway and had an elaborate plan to develop Mexico and the United States together from the Mountain West to Mexico City and to the coasts, going against the American monopolists who were developing in California and who were already in Wall Street. Here's a picture of one of his bridges on the Mexican National Railway. But his plan to build from Denver down through El Paso to Mexico City was blocked physically at the Raton Pass in northern New Mexico by the Santa Fe Railroad, who hired various gangs of thugs to block him. They had a number of battles. The Santa Fe Railroad was a factional representative of the British Boston and slave owner faction from that was throughout the century. This is the trademark of the Santa Fe Railroad, the British Lion, honoring this British financial sponsorship. So they blocked Palmer from trying to make the USA and Mexico co-developing friends. They wanted imperialism instead. The president of the railroad, Thomas Jefferson Coolidge, was a hereditary Boston opium lord. He founded the United Fruit Company. He and his son ran it at the start and built that up with mafia people as well from New Orleans. But this is a Boston operation. United Fruit Company made the terrible conditions in Central America that we have today in many respects. They and some other companies run out of these financial centers. General Palmer, needing a telegraph and facing a monopoly in Wall Street of Western Union, sent his assistant, Edward Johnson, to New York to set up a company to make a telegraph that could print automatically. And he and the guy he sent hired the young Thomas Edison, who was before that in the clutches of Wall Street as an employee. He was funded by the Philadelphia people and their friends to be an independent inventor. They set him up, including all the way up through the Menlo Park lab. Another Philadelphian from the Franklin Institute and University of Pennsylvania, Professor Barker, was the science advisor for Edison and was the one who suggested that that he invent a practical electric light. J.P. Morgan and Wall Street got control of Edison's company because the Philadelphia people had less and less money, and these guys had more and more money. And he blocked Edison from building any power systems for the general public. Morgan did. There was a stockholders' revolt promoted by the Philadelphia nationalists, and Edison proceeded for a while to set up the world's first power companies. Yes, I know some of you will say, oh, I love Tesla instead. Well, I'm sorry, but I think that setting up the power companies to begin with, the power plants, which were partly publicly owned in all these towns, I believe that setting up the first power plants in the world was a great public service. And then he had partners throughout the rest of the world. Also spread into Europe and into Russia through the Rathenhaus. So Edison personally set up these things. Wall Street blocked, and the British Empire blocked the wide usage of electricity. In many places, I know in Australia and some other places, American farms did not get electricity until well into the 20th century. And President Franklin Roosevelt had to do some things to change that. I'll get to that in a second. So these are his points of view about the world. Wait a minute. Here it is. The 4 freedoms for spreading a high living standard and no war. And the freedom to really have a human dignity throughout the world, not the regime change crap of today. At the same time, here's the electrification. Made good on what Edison was doing by setting up the power, government power, and also rural electrification for the farmers. Roosevelt and his ambassador in Mexico supported the president here's the president of Mexico, Lázaro Cárdenas, and here's the American ambassador, Josephus Daniels, who was FDR's former boss in World War I. So the Mexican president is seizing the holdings of Standard Oil and Shell Oil. And President Roosevelt backed him up through his ambassador. This guy then broke relations with England. Very important just before World War II to have Mexico on our side. He had a plan for the post-war to develop Iran and underdeveloped countries, and wanted the 4 powers to police peace in the world: USA, Russia, Britain, and China. Is that relevant to the people in the Americas? It is. Roosevelt helped Brazil build up, industrialize, built steel mills. The last American president from this standpoint was John Kennedy. Here is Kennedy and Kwame Nkrumah, and here's their dam to make electricity for West Africa. He was obviously murdered, and Nkrumah was overthrown right after the dam was built. Kennedy was a tremendous advocate for nuclear power, not nuclear bombs. He put a limit on the testing of bombs, as you know, but he wanted to develop nuclear power plants, especially for desalting water, for the peaceful cooperation of countries that were rivals and hated each other. India and Pakistan and so forth, Middle East. And this was our last great advance with the space program. So after his murder, the US policy had a drastic change. Philosophy of progress abandoned. Manufacturing no longer needed. Now we have lifestyles, high wages, and the nuclear family outmoded, out the window. Especially any sense of a national mission to uplift mankind is erased from the public idea. Now we're going to fight communism. That was to begin with. Now it's other things, because communism seems to have faded away. Fight pollution. That's still big. Express our sexuality. There's transhumanism. There's all kinds of things now. But this was a policy and strategic change upon the murder of Kennedy. Let's now look here. Defying this post-Kennedy policy, the president of Mexico, Jose López Portillo, with the strong idea input from Lyndon LaRouche, whom I worked with, fought to develop his country. And he declared a debt moratorium on foreign debts. And when there was a capital outflow, he nationalized the banks. And you can see already at the time that he is in office, it says Mexico, an angry neighbor. They were hysterical at this policy to basically restore the place of the indigenous people or their descendants as leaders of human thought and human accomplishment, going back, right, to ancient times. But now it's with dams and nuclear power plants and advanced agriculture that conserves the soil, water projects to solve the droughts. This is LaRouche's wife with old Portillo. Well, today we have child labor in El Salvador. We have tens of thousands of members of gangs that are allied to the drug cartels in Central America and in Mexico. And the U.S. Senate proved that they are those kinds of gangs, and the cartels are themselves money laundered by the biggest U.S. and British banks. Just concentrate on El Salvador, like other countries, has a terrible, burdensome debt. What did they get for the debt? They're not allowed to develop. They're compelled by the rules of finance, the rules of diplomacy, to never interfere with this poverty, which would require a hemispheric-wide development program, such as the U.S., the kind of development programs that the U.S. At its best specialized in more than any other country. Now we see, here's another one like that Time magazine cover. This is worried in a frenzy over China building infrastructure all throughout Latin America. They're doing what we should be doing. They're doing Lincoln's policy. They're doing the policy that they're fulfilling William Palmer's ideal from Denver down to Mexico City and beyond. So this is this is the full background, a little tiny outline of the full background of this problem. Why should there be terrible chaos and miserable poverty throughout this region? Why should there be lack of progress? There was a whole set of movements of a supposed leftist kind in Latin America, or they were called Marxists, they were called Maoists, and they condemned imperialism without actually going against imperialism. They said that these regions should be free of modern times. They should be free of imperial power development. And they wanted to go back to the spiritual development of their ancestors. Where are the great cities in their view that the people in South America and Mexico had? Where's the engineering? Where's the astronomy? Nowhere. This is an imperialist trick. So what I'm proposing is that the United States had two sides, just like the West has always had two sides: an imperial mystery religion side, and which is cannibalizing the human race, and the city building, nation building side. And that has to be promoted now to solve this border crisis. We have to redeem these people by changing back from being the cannibals that the present policy has made us. Wait a minute, here we are. Okay. Now I can stop sharing. What time is it? 7:48.
Good
So-
timing, Tony. Do you want to open it up for questioning for
I do, yeah.
the audience?
Yeah, I wanna
Okay.
open-
So
Yep.
I would suggest that people put in their name in the chat box, or you can put your question in the chat box and we can just read it. Or if you want to ask the question yourself, then please either raise your hand or write your name in the chat box so we know that you want to ask the question.
I don't see the chat box.
It's on the bottom,
Okay.
screen. Okay, wiggle your mouse over the screen. On the bottom, you see a toolbox, bar. It says chat on one of them. You see it?
I mute, stop video, security, participants, share screen, summary.
It's fine. So Magdalena, if you could see it, you could just moderate.
Yeah, why don't you
and
do
just
that?
call upon people to ask their question.
Okay, so I have this gigantic screen for some reason. Okay.
see,
Arlene, I see Arlene has a question, I believe. She put her name in anyway. So
It's Arlen.
Arlen,
ahead.
I'm sorry, Arlen. Okay,
Yes,
sorry
that's
about
okay.
that.
Bearded lady.
Okay,
That's
Um,
that's okay. The Arlene,
if everybody else could please put the mute on so that we can hear Arlen, okay? And Cynthia clearly and not interfere on otherwise. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Magdalena, please do not feel bad. I have had that problem my whole life, that Arlen somehow gets transmuted to Arlene, so that's okay. The question I have, or I don't know if it's a question that can be answered here. I'm not sure, but it's that the size of the undertaking that the transportation buildup of those railways that were across the US the steel, the birthing of the steel manufacturing process out of Philadelphia, the timing that these things took place in were so brief that
That's right.
it is a wonder to me, like, what is wrong with our world today, where, you know, the ability for the creative mind and the labor and the intelligence of man to extend out into a new enterprise and a new direction. Like how is that so impossible now? Is it just simply that the imperial control of finance and the whole structure of keeping the thumb on everybody through bankruptcy and through monetary control? How did they get out from under it then? So in
Okay.
the time of Lincoln and in the time of these railroad initiatives, which are, by today's standards, those are massive undertakings. Those bridges, those archways that they're building down to Mexico or in Mexico and everything, like, that is a marvelous, wonderful thing. But I guess my query is that was
I get
able
it.
to happen in history. So why can't it happen now? Okay, so that it happened in a way that was anti-imperialist. So they were able to execute these things. So today, what do we do today?
Okay. First of all, to just look at what you're talking about, beginning with laws and policies during the Civil War, 1861 to 65, and then coming to flower right after the Civil War, after Lincoln was murdered, but using those Lincoln policies. There was a period of, like you said, 10 to 15 years, especially the first like 6 or 7 years, of the most immense progress and concentrated efforts led by a particular faction, this Philadelphia faction, but involving the energies of the whole country and the spirit of the whole country. There was an attempt to involve the South in it, but that was blocked because these financiers wanted a cheap labor in the South. They wanted to keep the plantation system going.
Mhm.
But these developments, the steel industry, the oil industry was developed then. Rockefeller didn't develop it; he seized it a little bit later. Many projects simultaneously. Electricity soon afterwards, leaping ahead. Now, the context for this was the sudden change in American power from the imperial, you have to say, by the 1850s, similar to fascism, of this combination of the South and the war of the South to spread an empire, together with what was going on from the European empires, a sudden change to a new party in power, but not just politics, but rather that the struggle for the Union, with this idea of progress constantly in mind and beginning to happen before people's eyes. The victory of the Union in that kind of a struggle, and then seeing that what we had accomplished in the war was starting to be accomplished on an even bigger scale for peace after the war, gave a jolt to the positive imagination and to the spirit of people in this country, including immigrants that were coming in. That was immense. Also, suddenly Black people were a part of the thinking of the country. They had to fight for it, but many of them were armed in the South. But there was a an immediately previous excitement around the highest ideals in the world. And we won. And we then proceeded to build up the world as we saw it, and began sharing this with other countries right away. Not like the British Empire saying no other country should be allowed to develop. So we could have done this again after World War II. That was not done. But this faction, oh, I've got it. This faction was, that developed at this time. The Wall Street.
Tony, hold on for a second, because there's a big echo going on.
Yeah,
Would-
basically,
Everybody put on their mute, please. Gail, could you put your mute on?
Okay, that's better.
There's still a couple of people without mute, like Michelle
Oh.
and Ivan,
Okay.
phone and so on.
But I can
Please.
just let me finish this thought that now the world is in such a terrible state with the wars and with the encouragement by the Anglo-Americans for this chaos and terror. And so any important advance out of this conundrum, out of this terror, any important advance in the direction of progress, and by that I mean peaceful cooperation and getting people out of poverty. Just put those two things together in your mind. Peaceful cooperation of the biggest countries and advances out of poverty. Any substantial advance at all, no matter what it would be so startling to people now and would give people big ideas. It doesn't take changing the minds of everybody in the world before you do these things. In order to change the mind of the world's people and the American people and a lot of other people, you have to actually get some kind of a breakthrough towards peace and progress. And the switch would be an electric jolt that could encourage unstoppable forward motion, because so the global South and many people in other places want this kind of development to take place. So you have to answer your question, the background of this unbelievable progress that the US made that swept us up to being the world leader at that time, the background was the victory of the Union for a better world.
So then was the impetus for that energetic movement and flow of creativity and building, like tremendous building. Like what I hear you saying is that it's in the consciousness that it was that, we won the war and we're going to make these motions to move forward. And I guess the question that I have is the greenback. So the movement out of the imperialist banking that's controlled by that imperialist not throttle, it's the opposite, it's a governor, the governor to keep it down so that it can't move out and move forward. Like that's in the monetary system with the.
But that's not that you asked a brilliant question.
Well, thank
So
you.
go back to the spirit of the question. Don't look for, I would advise you not to look for ways that it can't be done or couldn't be done at the time. They did do it. And they did not have enough money to do it. They were blocked on the financial thing. That started even while Lincoln was still alive. The greenbacks,
Right.
they started to contract the currency. The enemy
Right.
was already getting in control of the money and so forth.
Right.
But the problem that the enemy has is that the human race they're not popular with humanity. They're not popular in the USA. The present regime is tremendously unpopular in this country. So the problem is, of course, who are they going to vote for? You know what I mean? They're not. The problem is to look at the spirit in which you ask that question. And then my work, which I'm trying to get people to work with me on this, on the thinking, is to go back to how we actually did these amazing things that resulted in progress, and what happened to these ideas. Why can't we do it again? Well, in some sense, it is being done again. The space program is alive again. The USA is not leading it, although people in this country would love to do that. You know, NASA would love to do it, and is making some progress and advances. But the world is ready to do these things. Yes, the Western, so-called quote unquote Western agencies and power structures, NATO, IMF, whatever, are running this so-called rules and are damping things down. That's not the question, really, to me. That's been going on for 70 years now, but or longer. But what is needed is for I think for the people in every place to see the background of the United States itself as having had a heritage that has a revolutionary heritage that has a powerful meaning for our country and for the world, for the benefit of the world. And if we don't live up to that now, we're committing a crime, a sin, an error. But that's who we are, essentially, if we're anything. Otherwise, we're just an extension of the miserable old stuff that came out of, ancient empires, where they believed that most people are garbage, and a few should be on the top. You have to start with the aching, the crying of the world for relief from terror, from sadness that could be relieved right now. I just did a play. I just released a play about this guy, Dan Bradley, who's an American medical missionary. And he saw the people in Thailand and saw what they needed, and befriended the king and the people there to fight for their sovereignty and independence from imperialism. And because he saw the tremendous need of the people to be relieved of this anguish of poverty and sickness, when it can be done. We have these things. We have these. I'm sorry to say something that's heretical here, probably in this audience, but we have vaccines. We have other kinds of medicine. I don't like the regime that use these things, but we have the means of using secrets of nature to solve problems. It's all ready to go. It's not been extinguished. So that's the issue. It's who we are. So let's go on to the next person, okay?
Yes.
Thank you.
Kevin had a question. Kevin, do you want to ask yourself, or do you want me to read this? It's a little hard to read.
I really
Kevin,
just, I'm
okay.
here.
Go
I
ahead.
really just want to know if there's any shot of expanding our railways, if there's any change to our air travel, they try to restrict that, or if we have any chance of doing what they're doing with the Belt and Roads over here, maybe down to South America or anywhere else.
Well, we did have a whole map, and I guess I'll put this in the last chapter of my second volume. I got 2 more chapters to write after the Palmer chapter, which is Edison and McKinley. McKinley was working with Blaine, President McKinley, and the Army engineers, together with South American engineers, developed a map. I have a copy of that, but it's the whole railway system that was envisaged from all of North America down to the tip of South America and through the Isthmus of Panama. Nothing like that occurred. We don't have any kind of rail system that goes between the continents. And the rails are particularly useful because they go through human development, through settlements, through cities, through towns, rural places. And you can use them to improve the places it goes through. You can't do that with an airplane. So, I mean, you can also use railroads to invade places and subjugate them, or to loot them, if that's in your agenda. But the Americas would be very usefully tied together by railroad, especially if you're planning to develop modern facilities of all kinds. It would be an exciting world for our children and our young people to contemplate jobs doing these kinds of things. Can you imagine the excitement of a 16, 18-year-old person, or even younger, looking forward to getting involved with improving the world, themselves in some really big way? Next person.
I think we had Matthew had a question. Matt, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay,
I'm
great.
here.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Anton. That was fantastic. And I had a few questions. You actually kind of nipped one of my questions in the bud by addressing McKinley and the broader vision for development of the Americas. So that's great. Thank you. I guess my observation I wanted to share, and then maybe it'll wrap into a question, is one concern that was brought to my attention from a contact of mine who made a point that I fell under my radar, that so far 6 American conservative states, including Texas, have signed these bilateral free trade agreements with Britain that have completely gone under the radar, all in the last few months, like very high density free trade agreements. Yeah. And then you have Governor Abbott also building this massive military base up on the Mexican border as well, with obviously saber rattling. We hear this deafening, this idea that it's time for the military to go gung ho and deal with the immigration crisis, even if that means an invasion. So obviously, in my mind, what you brought up and what you were the first person to bring this to my attention, that there was this effort to create a slave empire, and you had that very interesting map that you showed at the very beginning of your presentation in the 1850s. That would have been, a very, very big, expansive empire, beginning with the control of Mexico, but then more broadly of all of the Americas. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that, because I know you only brushed on it for a few seconds at the beginning of your presentation, but could you maybe address the possible, or what that was in more detail of an effort to create that empire, and then maybe draw a parallel to the current danger of that attempt being reinvoked once again today under the the new setting?
Yes. I devoted the second chapter of the book I'm writing, the volume 2, to this, and Lincoln's response to it. And that is the people who were in a dominant position. These are the elite plantation owners, not all slave owners, but the ones particularly in Virginia and their friends. This is a treason machine going back to the time of the American Revolution. I covered a lot of this in my book, Treason in America. But the people, there was a guy named Quitman in Mississippi, an international intriguer, guy in the Scottish Rite, a guy who really admired the British Empire, thought that Irish people were best governed by the empire, etc. What is he doing in Mississippi, right? So he was a leader of these filibusters, and he had marched into Mexico, was a military governor of Mexico City during the Mexican War. And the slave owners made this war in order to spread slavery to the territories and maybe take all of Mexico. They couldn't get, most Americans wouldn't go along with that. But these same leaders of they had then invasions, private invasions of Cuba that went along a long time, invasions of Central America, private invasions of Mexico, and so forth. They called filibusters. The people who did this in the 1850s were the command structure of the secession movement of 1860 and 61. This is the treason machine. And again, remember that there were people in the North who were called themselves abolitionists who approved of breaking up the Union because they said they'll take slavery out of the Union. What was the issue of this slave empire, this attempted slave empire of having the South, the southern part of the West, Mexico and Central America and the Caribbean, all part of one empire? The idea of this was to destroy the United States. To say that this was to spread slavery to make more money or something like that is, you might have that as an opinion, but then you don't know anything about these people. You don't care to know anything about these people and what was their background, what was their thought, what was their history. This is an anti-republic move, and Lincoln and his circle were fully knowledgeable of this whole thing as a treason against our country. His response to it was to develop the ideals of what you could do in a country that had a full development of its creativity. And so he did a study of human creativity and invention throughout history. And he made it, that was his favorite speech during his presidential campaign, which was at the same time as this terror operation going out of the South all over Mexico and elsewhere. And he gave a speech to farmers in which he said, in Wisconsin, 1859, I think, in which he said that the cause of war is the lack of sympathy to strangers. And in order to, he in that same speech, he's talking about the need to be able to develop concentrated agriculture that gives you the highest output for a small amount of land and enriches the soil, uses the most advanced science to do that. And he said anybody that has that power will be, any community with that, the power to do that, will be free of land kings, crown kings, and money kings.
Okay.
And so these are the two sides. One side is the United States, which came then to be led by Lincoln, right after this threat of a Southern empire. That the Lincoln's leadership was successful because of his philosophy, which was developed throughout his life. He was passionate about this concept of man. On the other side were imperialists who saw the mass of man, not just non-whites, but most human beings. They saw most human beings as garbage. if you look at Latin America as a place of, enemies, people as a mass of enemies who are going to roll up here unless we smash them. You may say that they're misled as an excuse, and you're only trying to stop the misleaders by smashing them. But if you say these things, you are not in sympathy with the United States or anything that it has ever accomplished on behalf of the people of the United States. Nobody with that attitude ever built any industries or built anything in this country. They certainly didn't make the revolution. Yeah, there were slave owners who participated in the American Revolution, but the ideals of the founders, who really put the revolution together, was universal progress. If you make a private free trade agreement with England, wow, why not just tear up the Declaration of Independence? If you put our army on the southern border, rather than solving the problem below that border and improving the situation so you don't have millions of desperate refugees, you're simply a fool. You're a dupe. You're like the people that I met in the militia movement back under when Clinton was president. They had these militia groups, and they were being manipulated by a faction in the Pentagon and CIA and other things, and British, into doing violent acts. And they thought that they were being patriots by doing that. And they were just being used by various kinds of police agencies. It was pathetic. So if your goal is not to solve the problem of this massive wave of refugees, but rather to have another forever war, does that make you a patriot? I don't think so. The present leadership of the United States is encouraging a wave of desperate people to flood into the United States. They have no thought about how they're going to solve the problem. Those who want to solve the problem have to address the problem. How much clearer could that be? You have to be really, really stupid to say we're going to deal with this with military force. You have to be so far beyond stupid that you're almost dead. Next question.
Thank you, Tony. That makes it very clear.
Thank you, Tony.
There is Liza had a question about mediocrity, I think. Okay. Eliza, are you there?
Yeah. One of the I read Cynthia's book on the Empire, and because each chapter was so dark, I started reading Mark Twain I needed to lighten it up a little bit for myself. And I found reading A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, I was like, okay, well, this is the solution to the book that Cynthia wrote, because I just needed Mark Twain, like somebody funny, but also serious. And I never appreciated before how deep Mark Twain was. And so I've been having my own personal Mark Twain festival. I'm just getting through The Innocents Abroad, where he talks about that whole area, because he went on the first boat cruise to the Holy Land, and talks about his impressions there, and he's hilarious. But I think he's really serious too, and I think his brain is way better than the people who are writing prose of his time. And I've been listening to Mark Twain scholars talk about him, and they said that Roosevelt actually got his New Deal from A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. There's so much in that book about, because what I see, and I'm Canadian myself, the biggest root of the problem is a self-esteem problem, because we fall for these things because we don't believe we can overcome. We don't believe that. There's a lot of lines in A Connecticut Yankee where he says, because it's a parody on King Arthur's court, and I think he's anyways, I don't want to go on too long,
Okay.
but yeah.
Well, let me say something about Mark Twain and then and then Canada. Okay. Mark Twain, in the 1860s, after the death of Lincoln, was associated with the Chinese ambassador to the United States, a man named Anson Burlingame. And Burlingame had originally been sent from the United States to China as Lincoln's ambassador to China, the US ambassador, to try to get equal status, justice in our relations with China, rather than do it the way the British Empire and the French had done to in the Opium Wars, to make China a vassal of the West. So Lincoln said, we're going to treat China in a dignified fashion. This is a great part of mankind, and they should be our friends. So Anson Burlingame went there. He did such a good job. The Chinese made him their ambassador to the United States. In 1867, he came over here and negotiated a treaty with the US government, with Seward, who was still Secretary of State. And he and Mark Twain, Burlingame and Mark Twain, together wrote a series of articles. Many of them, I think, are under Mark Twain's pen name, you know, as the sole author. It certainly has his voice, but it's the ideas of Burlingame. But Twain has his beautiful, good irony when he needs it. So he wrote about the treaty, and I've put that into this into my chapter on Reconstruction that is in the book, forthcoming book. In this treaty, it says that China and the United States are equals, have equal status. Chinese immigrants to the United States must be treated as any other immigrants, all the same rights. And the Americans were not going to have special privileges in China. We have the rights of any other people, but China has, each country has its own laws. China has its own laws, not to be imposed upon by foreigners. The last part of this treaty, which went into force in 1868, the Burlingame Treaty, the last article was that said that America will not tell China when or how we're going to, or whether we're going to have railroads. But when we decide that we want them, America will send us some really good engineers to help us do it. And that was the last article of the treaty. So Twain was obviously instrumental in making this, getting this across. It lasted for about 10 years, and there was especially from the Northeastern financiers who were fearful that Chinese people and who were immigrants, and Irish people who were immigrants, and Black people who had been freed, would all three of them overwhelm the aristocracy that they wanted to have ruling the United States. And that was the issue, really, of the so-called better people supporting anti-Chinese prejudice and laws in the USA. Now, Canada has a community, as does Seattle, out in Vancouver, out in British Columbia, a Chinese community, and there's other Chinese immigrants in Canada. Canada is a great haven for immigrants from different places in the world. And they have a wonderful attitude towards immigrants in Canada. However, Canada is part of the Five Eyes intelligence and strategy, with the British and Americans leading the way in the development of hostility to China, as well as Russia, as well as other countries that are considered enemies by this Five Eyes Anglo-American baloney. And so the issue with, if you look at Chinese immigrants in Canada and you say, well, I love immigrants, but I don't like the Chinese government or China as a nation, but I love the Chinese people. Hogwash. That was directly the issue for the Burlingame Treaty. And this is something you can look into deeply. And I want to try to get this across. The issue at that time was respect. Do you have respect for China? That's the same thing as respect for Chinese people, because that's who they are. They are a people. They have accomplishments. Oh, they also have quite a history, don't they? Going back thousands of years. So the issue of respect is really at the bottom, to me, of everything here. Do you have respect for these other people? As a people, as a nation? Do you have respect for Russia? Do you have respect for Iran? You don't have to like people running the country. In a sense, it's none of your business. But you're encouraging political changes in the world must go together with respect that the United States and Canada and England and do not show to the world's countries. You don't respect the people of a country that you're making impoverished by sanctions. You don't respect the people of any country if you're threatening, if you're withdrawing from nuclear treaties with H-bombs. You're insane, actually. So the test for Canada, to me, is this issue of the West Coast Chinese and the nation that it goes beyond that. China is trying to do things with infrastructure. People who I like and who are friends of mine say China is dangerous. And the person who says that is not thinking, because they're usually respectful. I know this kind of thinking. It doesn't show respect to the other part of mankind. And right now, it doesn't show respect to almost any part of mankind. That's the issue. This is something that is at the bottom of Lincoln's foreign policy. It was respect for other countries. This goes back to Greece, when Athens was very proud of its sympathy for and respect for strangers who came to visit, and they would always be invited in for dinner. That showed the world that Athens was a civilized place, and also made them powerful, just like the US was powerful when it was generous. When it's acting like an empire, it's becoming weaker and weaker, but as a result of that.
Thanks, Tony. I know that Arlen wanted to ask another question, but we have a few people who are waiting for a long time now.
Yeah.
Hugh, are you there? Can you hear me? You had a question?
I can hear you, and I will set up my, how does this work? Get rid of that. Okay, I have, yes, something provocative to say. And this conversation, this talk rather, reminds me of a snippet of conversation that took place between a US general and a Vietnamese general during the peace talks in Paris. And the US general said, you know, you never defeated us on the battlefield. And the Vietnamese diplomat said, that is true, but it is also irrelevant. The US has been reconquered. And the people who have reconquered it are responsible for what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in Gaza. The few times, you mentioned a couple of examples, Thailand is one, the United States Republic in 1776 is another one. The thing that people seem to forget as they talk about their ideas is that all these things were resolved by a contest of arms and not by ideas, because the people who currently run the situation don't give a tinker's damn about our ideas. So what do you think? What, like, you know, I don't see, this is only going to be done by a contest of arms. That's my comment.
Oh, well, it's just kind of an astonishing, I think that you're bringing up something that you're not exactly stating, because it's obvious you can't, what's the contest of arms between the world's people and 1% of the world's people? What arms are you going to use? That's not the way that you're going to deal with this. But one part of this contradiction, this paradox, is that George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt, three supreme American nationalists, were war leaders in these great military struggles. You know, Woodrow Wilson was the president during World War I, but he didn't lead the military. But the strategy is really set by
Woodrow
General
Wilson
Washington and
lied
Lincoln.
his people into the war.
What's that?
Woodrow Wilson ran on, he kept us out of the war.
Yeah, I know.
And he led them into it.
I know.
And
he got us into it,
Roosevelt
but
did too.
He didn't run the war.
Roosevelt also led them into it.
Well, anyway, I'm trying to make a point about
Sorry.
the character of these people and what they're trying to do. I believe, I think you can show it without too much protest. For Washington and Lincoln, I think you'll have a faction that hates Roosevelt and will protest. But I believe that the three of them share the idea of the American system, the Henry Clay, etc., who was also trying to get us in a war against England. But they wanted peace in the world. They did not approve of war. They wanted to especially establish the conditions under which war was not happening. I love I think I probably said it before, maybe I already did it, but to the same audience. But I'll tell you again, the two aliens came down in their spaceship and hovered over Earth, and one of them said to the other, "Is there intelligent life on Earth?" And the other one said, "Of course not. They're pointing their missiles at themselves." Right now, the issue in the world is that the would-be cannibalistic powers of the new imperialism, globalist imperialism, wish to have the world more and more off balance from a combination of war and various other forms of chaos, which they somehow in their wild dreams think they're managing. They're going to manage all this. Populists are so much love and hate these people that they believe that if you are a billionaire and you go to the Davos Forum, then you are supernatural and you can rule the world at your whim. and doesn't really work that way. These guys are trying to keep the world in a state of catastrophe. So if you say that the way that we're going to get out of this is through having some sort of liberation war, write your strategy down with a little bit more detail and submit it to me, and I'll show it to, my wife, and I'll show it to some other people, and maybe somebody will think it's good. But I can't see any possibility that fighting another war or fighting an insurrectionary war, because the enemy is the source of the insurrections. I mean, did George Washington start an armed struggle with England? Did the people of Boston start an armed struggle with England? No. The British Army was there and was marching against the people to shoot them and disarm them and to abuse them.
I think we still have that happening.
I think that's true, but you have a national consciousness which is looking forward to creating a society, a better society. And I would submit that what's necessary now, and that's why I'm writing what I wrote, what I'm writing, what I've been concentrating on for many years, is to try to get back to that actual sense of the mission of the United States. It's not just a government mission, but that's part of it, but it's the mission of our society to have improvement. There's too much argument about this, whether it's private or public.
You didn't love
You're
them?
missing the issue.
Give them back then.
So the idea that you would have a war to
I like
free
it.
you
I guess
from the enemy.
I'm not a ranch kind of steward.
Somebody's got to mute themselves.
May I ask a follow-up question?
All right, go ahead. Go ahead.
Give me an example in history where the ideas overcame the power without force of arms, without a contest of arms.
And you're saying, when was the contest of arms? Like in the Civil War, there was a contest of arms from 61 to 65. All of the developments afterwards took place without an armed struggle. The creation of the steel industry. There was a battle about that. There was a battle about that, but there was a force of public opinion behind development. There was a constant struggle in the United States between these two sides, national and anti-national. The first industrialization of the country took place in a period of peace in the 1820s into the 1830s. And that's what I covered in volume 1. But it involved a tremendous struggle which overcame temporarily the power of this combination of the Northeastern financiers, the British Empire, and the Southern slave owners.
And the main precedent was a contest of arms in 1776. And the main precedent for the late 19th century development was the Civil War. Can you give me an example of where these ideas, which I totally support, I mean, I just wish, right? I can't find an example in history where the powers that be said, oh, you know what? Those are better ideas. I think we should completely change everything. So give me an example where this has happened.
Where the powers that be gave up without a struggle?
Yes, said, oh, your ideas are better. We should completely change our worldview and our desires and ambitions and be
Well,
like
how about the powers that be being displaced rather than changing their view and so people deserting from that power structure? Is that okay?
it hasn't happened ever.
I see.
You're still not giving me an example of where it has happened.
What about
And
Gandhi?
what about wars? What about wars that ended in the complete devastation of peoples?
The people
Is
we
that,
are
can you
struggling
include
with
that
are
in
willing.
your calculus?
Now, hey, a traitor will burn his city down to rule over the ashes. And we're dealing with very, very committed people who are betting the world.
So you're proposing that who should make this armed struggle?
I don't know. All I'm
Ah,
saying, I
well,
don't
that's
know.
a great plan for a war, isn't it? Isn't that
I
a
beg your
great plan for the war? Who's the leadership? Donald Trump? Who's the leadership? The Patriot Militia Movement? The Texas governor is going to fight an armed struggle against who? Is he going to fight a struggle against Davos? Oh, I'm sorry. He just made a trade deal with England. He thinks the enemy is in Mexico. I don't think that you're thinking about the present world at all. Is the enemy China? Shall we have an armed struggle against China? That's where our missiles are pointed.
I would say the enemy is the Atlantic Alliance from between the City of London and Wall
Well,
Street.
how do you break that? Are you gonna go and fight a war against England? That's
I
not
don't
gonna solve
know.
the
I'm
problem.
asking you. You're the
I'm
historian.
telling you, I'm telling you that first of all, you have to start thinking in different terms. I know that you're sort of frantic about, history is black because it's all death that results in somehow improved life. I don't think that's the way to look at history at all. I think that's wrong.
Let me intervene here because Bruce, I think, had an idea.
Thanks very much.
About,
Go ahead.
okay, Bruce, you
Go
want to
ahead.
go
Yeah.
ahead?
But I want to defer to Arlen, who had an answer first, and Cynthia.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, Arlen, you're on mute.
What now?
Okay, I
Okay.
think I got it. Thank you, Bruce, for that.
Thank you, Bruce.
I appreciate that. So there are some fundamental issues that we're getting to, which surprised me that this discussion of history and the way that the development of the Americas and the obvious jumps that were like that you've presented to us tonight, and then these vast expanses of the opposite, of non-jump, of suppression by that imperial power. And so Hugh brings up the question of, okay, so we have these better ideas. We've got these ways of doing things in a way that will lift up the poverty-stricken, the other nations of the world, that will make it a better situation for each such and one, each man and woman. And that's a beautiful idea. And so we present it to, or potentially we present it to the powers that be, which is the point of this question that we're on right now. And so what? The bankers and the imperialist power structure, the powers that be, take a back seat to say, oh yeah, like Hugh suggesting. So they just say, oh, it's a better idea. Yeah, let's go. You can have the reins. You can control the directive that we're going to go through for some period of time. And of course, that goes against the notion of the slave empire, that the directive and interest is that the spread and increase of the few, the oligarchs, different names, whatever you want to call them, are running this show to bring about as much as close to the total enslavement of humanity for the benefit of those few. And so Hugh is suggesting or is hinting at, well, the only times in history when this has been interrupted is when people come to arms and they say, oh, no, you don't. I'm going to stand here and I'm willing to die for my ideals and for my people and for the well-being of my people. And so the question is what is the alternative? What is the thing that will bring about a force that is enough of a force that the powers that be, which I don't know, exactly in this discussion how far we're going to go down the road. I brought up the point of about the greenbacks, but the control of the money supply, the control of the money markets, the control of lending, of production of money, of who has the money, to fund the building of railways. And
I get your question. Okay. I want to try to answer this now. Let's go back to what I presented. Let's go back to, first of all, let's go back to the ancient inhabitants of this hemisphere. They made progress, and the progress was undoubtedly, and you could prove it, I'm sure, in the face of opposition from what would want to be, and at times was, an oligarchy. And
they didn't
I'm
have the
sure
reach.
they had. Hold on. Yeah,
I
but
apologize.
hold on, because I'm aiming at something different than you are. I have a completely different idea than you do. So what do we start with when we're looking at history? What were the needs of the people? And how did the human mind conduct itself with genius and with encouragement and with organization to accomplish inventions and skill and production that brought human benefit out of the secrets of nature over a long period of time? I believe in every society, you have these two tendencies: an oligarchy tendency, imperial tendency, and families that want to rule over other people and cannibalize them and want to have wars, versus a productive city building and nation building and scientific excitement faction, which has popularity at certain times. Popularity, public opinion goes back and forth. To say that the primary thing you have to look at is that bad guys were beaten by the force of arms is it's a way of looking at things that says, yeah, human needs are important. That's a different subject. My subject is fighting bad guys. And so what is the history of the human race? It is a history of advancement, sometimes going backwards. The human mind has been creative all the way back to the beginning of our human race. So start now from the needs of the people. The people that run the Western financial world do not control the whole world. They are being challenged. They are being challenged by a growing set of ideas and countries. Some of this is in the BRICS, some of this is in the global South, other ways. I think China and Russia are the leaders of this. I think that whatever you say about China and Russia or any of the others that are in this, every country has something wrong with it that's involved here. There are wars all over the place and uprisings against these people. But the thing that we're starting with, if we're trying to save the world, is the need of the whole world's people, including those children in El Salvador, whose families are trying to escape this terror of being subjects and slaves.
Can I
What
speak to
do
that?
they need? What do they need? They need power plants. They need industry. They need scientific institutions of all kinds. They need skills. They need education. They need modern transportation. How can they get it? Well, the BRICS countries are moving in that direction. People in the United States need infrastructure. Are these issues of concern to you? They're of concern to the oligarchy who says we're not going to allow it. But if you're not starting from what we need to do, then you're not looking at the actual history. What was the fighting about? What was the Civil War about? What was the American Revolution about?
Power.
Anton,
Was it
please,
simply a power struggle between
Yes.
one group that had vague ideas about freedom and some other group that had vague ideas about subjugating them? No, they had two different views of what it means to be a human being. What's your view of
Please.
what it means?
please let me allow me to answer you, Anton. So please do not mistake my petition, my concept of answering this question of change is only made by force. Okay, that I am the last person to suggest that the solution is to go and get a gun and go shoot somebody or fight in a violent manner to destroy. That is not at all what is in the background or in the consciousness of what I'm coming from. The thing that that I go back to what Hugh, the point that he brought up is that these forces, these powers that be, as we've apparently agreed to call them, are not going to just lay down and say, oh, this is a better idea. Somebody's come up with a better mousetrap, and so let's do that. The issue that why I'm here tonight and why I am working at every day to come up with a concept of what is the thing, what is the motive, what is the energy that will shift consciousness of man, that will shift even the power of man, both individually and collectively, from the individual moving out, like out to the whole. That's my pursuit. My pursuit is that I have to start with me. And so this notion that I'm going to somehow, going to go get a bazooka and go to my bank or the legislative assembly in my province or whatever and say, oh, no, you don't, kapang, whatever. No. That's the last thing in my awareness. But there is a fundamental that goes along with what I believe Hugh was addressing in his question, that the powers that be, the international bankers, the imperialist, the City of London, have in their grasp, okay, that is the thing to overcome. And yes, I totally agree with you, Anton, that each individual moving out into their community, what do we need? What do we need? We have dirty water. There's no clean drinking water. We need clean water so that our life can be that much better.
Clean crops.
Clean crops, yes. Totally agree with you, Anton. And the consciousness and the effort and the impetus to change that, yes, absolutely, is the primary criteria, going down each to that individual level. And so I'll try and sum up. I'm talking too much, but the sum up, it for me is that I believe that one can make a difference and make a change in the direct relationship to that imperialist banking cabal control mechanism that is not using a bazooka or a gun or a whatever. And that is what I pursue. And you asked me back at the beginning of this, before we were recording, what do you do? Kind of outlining, why are you here at this meeting, at this discussion? I'm here to learn more and to find a way that I, at the individual level, can act in such a way that I will lessen the control and the reach of money, finance, imperialist, banking cabal, etc.
Okay,
And
can I?
that's my
sum up?
pursuit.
Let me sum up now because we're running out of time.
Thank
I
you.
want to hear from Bruce.
The people throughout the world have a different relationship to production and the productive forces than people who have been schooled in British imperial thinking. Now, you don't have to be pro British Empire to have this problem. There's a problem in Canada. There's a problem in New Zealand. There's a problem in Australia. There's a problem in the Anglophile background of the USA. Even though the USA changed its character in many ways. And the relationship of the people of America's best past to production and productive forces led them to think big. Martin Luther King thought big, and he foresaw the industrialization of the South as something that was vitally necessary. He and Gandhi didn't believe in so much in that big industrialization, but they also saw mankind as creative. And they said that if you are foreseeing yourself as having a revolution or an insurrection with force, then you are you're deluding yourself. You're being a dupe. You're not going to solve it. That he saw a relationship between love and power. And I believe that this relationship to a productive society is not something that people in today's many people today, including a lot of populists, have lost that connection to a productive society that allows them to think big about the way the world should be proceeding. What should the world do? The idea of making a revolt or an insurrection against the ruling powers of anywhere without having a vision of what the hell you want to do with the society, not simply to not be ruled by somebody else, but what are the needs that you're going to fulfill? And that has to do with, you talked about clean water and some other things, clean soil, etc. But, you know, if 3 billion people need electricity, hot electricity now, then they're going to need nuclear power plants. They're going to need dams. They're going to need high-speed trains. They're going to need city complexes and science complexes. They're going to need huge constructions. They're going to need all kinds of new ideas about taking care of the soil or growing things without soil. They're going to need the space program. And yes, the enemy oligarchy, the financiers at the top are opposed to this. They are in a shrinking minority, as are white people in the world. And these are a minority of the white people. So the thing that saves us is that every nation on this planet has burning physical and cultural needs right now. They are now beset by wars, and you have to see that the way that you are framing this around the necessity, the supposed historical necessity for war to solve oppression, is a non-starter. You're in the wrong universe at the present time. Or really, I think at any time, but especially now, when we are what we need desperately is an anti-war movement that is based on the common needs of mankind. That has the power to use the Constitution of the United States and legality internationally. But in the USA, that we do have a constitution, and we have to exercise political power. That's going to mean a terrible struggle. But the idea of armed force right now is put forward as a fool's errand by the enemy. I have to say that. And this is something that's been going on for a very long time, going back to Mazzini, going back to the movements of Europe in the late 19th, no, the early middle 19th century, where they had all these armed insurrections for liberty. And the American policy wisely was to stay the hell out of it when we had good leaders. So that's my answer. So we're
Thank
gonna
you so
have to
much. Thank you so
close
much,
up.
Tony. I have a question. Do you have Bruce has been raising his hand very patiently for a
I'm
long
sorry.
time. Do you
Go
still
ahead.
have time for one more question from Bruce, or
Sure.
do you want to wrap it up?
No, sure, do one more, but then I gotta go.
Okay. Bruce, go ahead.
And Anton, you just touched on it in your last comments. The example of Gandhi, that was the urgent thing I wanted to submit for Hugh's consideration. And now generally to help I hope your whole point tonight, Anton, about our creative powers, for me, it really comes down to identity. Someone referring to Canada alluded to bad self-esteem, which comes down to the issue of identity. So to me, the bottom line is very metaphysical. I have what I give to you because at a deep level of reality, there is only one. We are really an emanation of a one that exists. So everything I think about you, that's what I think about me. How I value what I want for you, that is what I want for me. And when you couple that with the ideals of the American founders and the ideas of people like Lincoln and all those you mentioned, Anton, who talked about improvement, but the universality of it. We can't have anything for ourselves that we don't want for everyone. Period. Amen. Thank you for your decades of work.
Thank you, that's right. That's exactly right. Everything we accomplished that was really of deep value as a society had a universal character, and the best leaders who built up the USA wanted to have the development and improvement of the whole world. And the imperialists never built a goddamn thing in the United States. Nothing. They didn't build any industries or anything. They just took for themselves, but they were tearing things down all the time.
Thank you so much, Tony. That was a very thought-provoking presentation, and caused a good discussion.
Thank you all for
Okay, I'm
coming.
sure we're hoping we're having another Zoom meeting some other time in the near future, hopefully. Okay, we'll see. But I wanted to again thank you very much on behalf of all of us. And with that, I would like to close the meeting. Yes.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you so much,
Bye.
everybody. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Anton. Very good.